Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Filling the Human Gap with Technology. Artificial intelligence may know you better than you know yourself. Sponsored by Sumo Logic. My name is Mary Lynn Gollier of SANS. Today's featured speakers are Matt Bromley, SANS Certified Instructor, and Christopher Beyer, Principal Product Marketing Manager, Security Solutions at Sumo Logic. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to our presenters.
Awesome. Thanks, Marilyn. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are joining us from. It's great to have you here. Really excited to be joined here by Chris as well. Chris, how are you doing today?
Oh, fantastic. Really stepping out of summer back into the school year. And, just like my children, we all need this extra learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I got to say, I'm not sure, where everyone who's watching is located at, but I myself am located in Texas. And for the first time, we've had multiple days that have not had 3-digit temperatures. It's actually dropped into the 70s here. So for anyone who wonders if fall's on the way, it certainly feels like it. Of course, the moment I say that, Mother Nature is going to poke the sun out and we're going to be right back to it. So maybe I just, caused something I didn't want to, but nonetheless, we'll see. But with that being said, it's great to have you here, Chris. I appreciate you joining me for this webcast today. I also appreciate everyone who's joining us for this discussion as well. I think we've got a really interesting thing to kind of go over and review today. Chris and I spent a little bit of time prepping for this particular topic and kind of discussing what it means or how we feel about these types of approaches. And we're talking here about the human side of technology, and how artificial intelligence might be able to help you know yourself better than you actually do, or how AI can step in and so that it knows you better than you actually know yourself. And of course, we're looking at this from a security defensive measure. Now, Chris, we did not include it in our slides. However, I know that when you and I started putting this content together, we did not have the shining, glaring example of a ransomware group calling out a casino help desk as a vulnerable target. But that being said, the human aspect of things that have been going on are certainly very upfront and apparent in everyone's face right now. And of course, we're not going to comment on that because neither Chris nor myself are involved in the investigation. So the best we could do is speculate, and no one wants to hear that. But I will just use that as a motivation to underline why some of the topics we're going to look at today are very important, very pertinent to what you see going on out there as well, especially from a security perspective. Chris, before we move on into kind of our key topics and highlighted points here, I know that when we put this together, we pulled a little bit from the ever wonderful and awesome Lance Spitzner, who's the SANS Security Awareness Director and has put together the Security Awareness Report for many years now. And I first maybe wanted to get your thoughts on kind of like, how do you feel about how Lance feels about humans being in this process or part of the security process?
Well, I think two items come to mind is one, we have to have humans as part of the process because they're the targets. It's hard to recognize kind of the issues that we're going to be talking about, the risks that come to all of our technologies without acknowledging that those risks are human risks. But at the same time, there's more that needs to be done from an awareness standpoint. I think we need to continue, prosecuting and processing and teaching and having those great conversations to try to make our humans maybe less human, or less risky. But at the same time, we need to augment. We have some fantastic technologies now. We now have access to bigger data sets. It's time to help our humans really deal with themselves. That's why that artificial intelligence may know you better than you know yourself is really sticking in my mind. It came to me reading a couple other articles having to do with priming people for advertising and things of that nature. But the reality is, even if we click on something that we're not supposed to, there's a lot of behaviors that are happening in the back end. And if we can catch those things early, faster, better, stronger, then we can reduce some of the risk. We can do some of the damage that can be done by a breach. So that's why I think looking at both humans and technologies together is got to be the only way forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you're calling out one of the most important parts, which is that humans are unavoidable. We can't ignore the human part of the process. So let's find a way to help augment and secure. And I think you called that out great. Just a quick note for everyone. I believe Mary Lynn on the SANS side is about to send a link out to everyone, just so that you know kind of what we're talking about and what we're referring to and everything like that. However, this is the SANS security awareness reports and various resources associated with that. That link is going to hit everyone here in the Zoom chat. That is one of the references that Chris and I will be referring to quite a lot here. There it is one of the things that we'll be referring to during our webcast. I highly recommend everyone involved with human capital, managing a security program, user education, things like that. Definitely check out some of these resources, because there are things above and beyond what Chris and I are going to talk about that I think is very valid for everyone to have as well. So nonetheless, we've got those resources there. Let's go ahead and jump right into kind of maybe some of the core topics here that we're going to walk through and that we're going to talk about. And what I did, Chris, in order to prepare us for this, is I went and took a look at the 2023 Security Awareness Report. And this is a fantastic report. So a huge hat tip over to Lance for pulling this together. Thousands of respondees, if I'm not mistaken, really took a look at 2,000 security awareness professionals to benchmark how organizations are managing their human risk. And the nice thing is we get the human side of it from SANS. And then Chris is here to tell us about how Sumo Logic helps to augment some of that as well. So today is going to be a combination of human and technology forces working together. But the very first risk that came up, one of the most significant ones, and again, it's very fresh in the news and fresh in everyone's mind right now, is the concept of phishing, vishing, or smishing. I got to say, usually I just kind of rope everything under phishing, but the previous or the latter two terms get their mention as well. Vishing and smishing, just for anyone who's curious here, vishing is, I believe, more kind of voice driven, where you might actually have a phone call or something like that, which again, very fresh in the news. And then smishing is, I believe, phishing via SMS texting or text phishing, for lack of a better term. The PH phishing is typically associated with email inboxes and things like that. But the report called this out as the top human risk, which in our opinion, and this is me speaking now, I believe this risk is only going to become more dangerous as we experience more growth of artificial intelligence. And Chris, this is maybe the first discussion point, the first little crossroads here, where, one thing that I've mentioned on many webcasts that I've been on is any tool for the defenders can also be a tool for the adversaries and vice versa, right? A reconnaissance tool that an adversary could use to find your vulnerabilities in an environment can also be used by the defensive team to find the exact same vulnerabilities. But that being said, artificial intelligence is one of those things that can both help us and can hurt us as well. And I think we've seen that with a lot of like deep fakes and voice transcripts and things that have come out. And I first wanted to get your thoughts maybe on, is this a growing concern, do you think, or is artificial intelligence actually going to win in helping kind of batten these numbers down as opposed to, enabling them to grow?
Well, just like any other tool, it can, as you stated, it can be used for good and evil, as the case may be. Here's an interesting point. I was at a show recently where some folks are demonstrating how they were using artificial intelligence, specifically ChatGPT. We'll talk a little about that later in this conversation. And they fed ChatGPT some points about how vulnerability might be weaponized, and said, "Hey, build this for me. weaponize this vulnerability for me that's not in the wild yet. And then we're going to take the output of that and use that to train our other AI ML systems to go and then look for those indicators of attack and indicators of compromise that were created by ChatGPT. And since they can do it so quickly, they were able to run through that exercise 1,000 times and really train up artificial intelligence on the good side to look for those things that might happen on the bad side. So first off, I agree. You know, phishing, this first human attack where somebody's getting credentials. Credentials are the number one, you know, kind of concern for breaches, and they have been for years now. It's a lot harder for the humans to distinguish from those deep fakes, and I hear the phone calls. There was even a story of a phone call where a mother got a call saying, "Hey, your son has died in an auto accident," while she's on another line with her son. You know, it's they're trying to kind of fake people out and get information maybe they shouldn't necessarily have. So, you know, wholeheartedly agree. This is the number one kind of issue. Agree that artificial intelligence is going to can spike things up a little bit, but at the same time, we have those tools available to us as well on the good side, and we need to figure out how to utilize them to our best efficiency.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important consideration for everyone to go through this as well. And we will talk about Chat GPT for sure. But, you know, it's really gone the way of making a lot of changes for a lot of organizations. And I think when we talk about this kind of as a human risk, it's important to keep in mind as well, just, you know, that things can be turned against us, for lack of a better term. And it's very possible that the same thing that could be very helpful to your analysts or to your users, you know, may also be helping the adversaries out as well. But as Chris pointed out, it's a tool, right? It is a tool, and we're going to find ways to make sure we utilize the AI side of what is now security for good and for our own benefit. And I know, Chris, you've got some comments on this a little bit later on as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The next risk that we'll jump into, and again, our goal here is, we're going to go back. There we go. The goal here is for us to walk through kind of the top 4 risks that we see in the report and offer some feedback and commentary on them. That being said, everyone, as with any SANS webcast, we are live right now. The Q&A window is wide open. Feel free to drop in questions, comments, or concerns. And even better, if you disagree with Chris or myself, we'd love to hear about that too. We're big fans of that. But the second risk that we'll get into is going to be one that I feel is actually a very, very big deal for a lot of folks, and that's passwords and authentication. And, you know, the Securing the Human report calls this out as a big human risk for a few different reasons. First off, they're kind of intertwined with each other, although I will say authentication can sometimes be a little bit more broad because it can include concepts like MFA or biometrics and things like that, whereas passwords, everyone typically thinks like, you know, the password box and stuff. But let's just think about maybe account access in general. The report does call out, which I think is something many security folks forget about, I know many users forget about, is that the concept or the idea of a password itself is perceived as lower risk, given the fact that we can use password managers, or we have MFA in place, or there's all these preventative measures, you know, oh, my users use strong passwords, so the concern goes away. And it's like, well, that helps satisfy a requirement, but it doesn't prevent theft or abuse. It's kind of like saying, you know, I've got really, really strong locks on the door, so I'm all set. And then you lose the keychain. And it's kind of like, well, now whoever picks it up is just as strong as the person who implemented them. And then the report also calls out something that I think is very, very valuable to mention as well, is that things like password managers, they help users keep strong passwords. They don't prevent theft, or they don't prevent abuse, and they don't prevent data breaches. MFA, and I had this discussion with someone, I think 2 days ago, about the use of multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is not a breach killer, for lack of a better term. It doesn't stop you from getting breached. What it does is it raises the bar of entry for some adversaries, and it eliminates a percentage of attacks out there, comma, that depend on single factor authentication. It doesn't remove them from your threat landscape. It simply makes it harder for those attacks to be successful. And again, I'll use my exact same example. Let's say I've got a door and it's got 3 deadbolts on it for whatever reason. And y'all think of those kind of crazy government conspiracy movies where someone gets in their house and they're locking, the door from ceiling to floor and things like that. In that particular case, right, you think of someone having a crowbar as maybe being a single point of entry. And then you think, well, I've got multiple deadbolts, so the crowbar doesn't work, right? And then I think about the old Hollywood scene where they go back and they get like one of those chainsaws that cuts through metal and things like that. So it forces the adversaries to up their toolkit, if you will, but it doesn't necessarily remove the threat of this happening. And I think the report calls this out correctly and says, yeah, this is still a threat. It's still a top concern for many organizations, because once adversaries do have those passwords, they're in. They've got authentication measures in place, and it's not always as perfect as we think. Chris, what are your thoughts on this being one of the other top concerns here?
I feel very strongly about this. You had mentioned a couple of things right then about sort of the brute force, requirements necessary to get through some of these systems. And I'm thinking about the human side. It's like the more locks you put on the door, the more things that we require for humans, the harder is it for them to then go and do their jobs. So what do? They find their own ways around some of these things. Like, say, okay, if I don't have to use the VPN, then I'll do something else. Or if I don't have to, if I use the same password at work as I do on Yahoo, then that's one less thing that I have to remember. And I think the password, kind of keepers and things like that give us a little bit of a false sense of security that those things are safe, those secrets are safe, and yet we're still dealing with the human kind of aspect of these things, and bad guys know this. They know how to attack the humans in order to get the keys to the kingdom here, in order to become prescriptive insider folks. So if once they make it through the front door, they have access to everything on the inside, the soft squishy middle. And if we're expecting, here's my favorite story. I live up in Portland, Oregon. We have a fantastic university here, Lewis and Clark University. They have a nuclear reactor. It's a small one. It's pretty cool. But who do you think manages the nuclear reactor? Graduate students. So I can get into the nuclear reactor for a couple, pies. Let's get them some pizza, and I'm in. What kind of damage can I do there? I feel the same way when we start talking about passwords and authentications and locks that we're putting on doors as a human risk.
I like it. You reminded me, Chris, of there's a age-old story. I think it's not necessarily password related, but it does speak towards some of the same capabilities of humans. And it's I believe a class of engineering students boards a flight. Have you heard this one before? A class of engineering students and their teachers board a flight, and as well as other folks from a university or something like that. And the pilot gets on, and the pilot goes, just so you all know, the plane that we're about to fly was built by the students on this plane. And everyone rushes off the plane except for their instructor. And they come to the instructor and say, why didn't you run off the plane? And he's like, I know my students. There's no way this thing's taken off. And I think it's a really it's a really good understanding of kind of the human side and the capabilities that are in there. So I found that to be maybe a distantly tied anecdote, but one that definitely ties in there as well.
Sure.
All right. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into our third risk here. And this is one that I feel is gonna take a little bit of time out of our webcast here this morning or this afternoon. Is going to be the idea of detection and reporting. And this is something that I think is either way too overstressed in some organizations or very much understressed in others. And that is the kind of see something, say something, approach. And funny enough, I hear this quoted in airports all the time. Whenever you walk through, you hear about the TSA talking about see something, say something. But I think this is an important understanding of kind of the human firewall of side, requiring that when you see or observe something that doesn't feel right, or that you think might be some sort of an attack or something like that, to report it, to say something to the security team and say, hey, there's this thing that's going on that just doesn't feel right to me, or I think that, maybe I'm being targeted, or I'm under attack, or something along those lines. And this is an important qualifier because it establishes that my humans or my users really are that final line of defense. I can block 99.99999% of all spear phishes, but it's that 0.0001% email that gets through where I'm going to need my users to say, hey, it's an FYI, I think this thing is bad. I got this thing. And this is not user education necessarily, as it is empowering users to remember, hey, you're part of this program, right? You're part of this this line of defense here. And I think that is maybe the first important consideration. The second side of this here is that if we don't foster this, or if we don't empower this to happen, unfortunately, risks will go unmentioned and unknown. And this is where it ends up being a little tricky for organizations. And I'm thinking back to some experiences that I've had here where I have worked with organizations. We've been doing an investigation, or we've uncovered alerts or something along those lines. And all of a sudden someone says, oh yeah, I remember something like that way back when, I remember that I saw this thing, last year or a few months ago, or whatever it might have been. And as we start to unravel and start to pull on things, you notice, wait, there was actually some signs here that something was happening or something was going down. And that's not to assign blame to anybody. It's more of to empower your users to say and remember, hey, you never know what the tiniest little detail is going to mean or is going to matter to the organization. So if you do see something or you feel something is off, feel free to mention it and say it, so the security team has an idea of what's happening. And maybe, Chris, before I get your thoughts on this, the last little line I'll give here is, I spoke with someone yesterday who was the victim of a pretty severe spear phishing attack. This was part of assisting them in kind of building out their strategy for this. But as part of this spear phishing attack, they were able to describe that they had undergone this relentless barrage of spear phishes, and it just was again and again and again, and they just kind of felt like, wow, I got to the point that the adversary was sending me all these things, and that they started including attachments for different processes. Like, they really wanted to get in, and they weren't sure if it was one user, if it was one adversary or multiple adversaries, but they felt like they were getting spear phished a lot, and it just felt like more than others. Come to find out, when they finally voiced their concern, it was a good number of folks at the management and executive level who were undergoing the same thing, but no one had spoken up. Now, there had been no breaches. No one had clicked through or had done the thing, right? No one had provided the passwords or downloaded the malware or whatever it was. But this one user felt like they were alone in this attack. They had certainly, clicked and said, this looks like, we reported things as spam, bumped them up to the email solution, so on and so forth. They had gone through all those different steps, which is great. That's what we teach them to do. But it was that extra little moment of, I've gone through this as well, where the security team was able to say, hold on, this is not just, the normal hum of an email inbox. We feel like we're being targeted, like we're being attacked here. And sure enough, after a little bit of digging and a little bit of investigation, they were able to tie some of the malware and some of the indicators back to a adversarial group. I won't name which one, but they were able to tie them back to a pretty severe adversarial group. Let me tell you all, when you know that you're in the crosshairs of a particular group, all the senses start to raise up, right? All the risk levels start to raise up a little bit, not in a bad way. Again, no breach had occurred. No one clicked anything, but it was that knowledge sharing, that additional step that allowed them to say, wait, there's more here. Did some correlation. Oh my gosh, we now know that we're under, we're not under attack, but actively being courted by this threat actor. And they implemented some defenses, and sure enough, they were able to have a little bit of vote of confidence that said, hey, we haven't been breached yet, but we know we're under suspicion, or we know that we're an intended victim of this adversary. So let's ramp up our defenses a little bit. And, the management's happy, executive team's happy. They know that they haven't fallen victim to a breach and they know what their risks are right now. And it's one of those things where, again, just the little tiniest information sharing really help them kind of make and coordinate that, as opposed to 3 executives, 4 executives sitting independently thinking, oh, these are just normal spearfishes, until unfortunately one of them maybe succumb to it. So it's just a little bit of an anecdote there, a longer story, but definitely one that shows that see something, say something can go miles without you even knowing about it. Chris, what are your thoughts? Top 3, or this is maybe the third of our top 4 human risks here. Do you think users underreport, overreport, or do we need to fix something here?
Oh, I definitely think we need to fix something here. I think that we need to make it easier for reporting. You know, and in some cases, I'm looking at my own email and trying to find, well, where's the button that I report, phishing attempts to. I used to have a link right here where I could just get there and say, yep, I think this is a phish, and then I'd get that satisfaction back from my IT group, say, yeah, you're right. You appreciate it. Now, thanks for the information. Or I get the message back to say, yes, this was the training email that we sent to everybody. Good job. But at least it's giving me that confidence. And what I think we need, more for our users is delivering confidence to them, that when they do see something that's off, that there's an easy way for them to report it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the other step, or the other takeaway for security teams here as well is, Chris, you said it best. When, make it easy for them to report something, say something. And I'll tell you the other side of this. There's definitely been instances where, in public, and I'm kind of looking at that TSA example again, but in public, I've seen something that maybe seems off. Like maybe there's a passenger who looks, not suspicious, but maybe they've had a little too much to drink, or they're kind of leaving their stuff lying around or whatnot. Who do I report it to? Who do I go tell about that?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's important to know that if I give my users an outlet, you might actually see an increase in the amount of things that they report. So that being said, let's jump to our next human risk. And this is going to be one that, again, is going to hit home for a lot of folks. And this is IT admin misconfiguration. Now, let me issue a statement one more time. Neither Chris nor myself are blaming any individual humans here. These are survey results. These are not independent targets, if you will, or individual targets perhaps, but instead it's an important consideration. This one, I think, is not laziness or any sort of human flaw. It's more, sometimes we're working under pressure. Sometimes we just, unfortunately forget things. And other times, and this is going to be the one that I think is probably going to get security folks the most, sometimes we just don't know. We just don't know what we don't know. And that becomes very tough for some organizations as well. Because again, the idea of an admin setting up a service or creating an application or deploying something, whether it's a cloud resource or a third-party application and whatnot, may unfortunately leave something misconfigured, privileges are too high, passwords are too low. You do tend to step on a little bit of hubris here, where you get some admins who say, well, I'm a professional. I have a long password. I don't need multi-factor authentication because no one's going to compromise what I have. Again, that false sense of I have a long password security. And this leads, unfortunately, to admins thinking that they're in a little bit of a privileged state and treating their environments and resources as such. And this has actually happened way more than I'd like to admit. Again, I won't name any names, but the number of times I've been part of an investigation and uncovered an account that the admins used that was never expiring password, really lax password policies and things like that, or the times that we've run into services or applications that have been deployed and just have been completely misconfigured, haven't been set up correctly. And again, sometimes it's laziness, sometimes it's hubris, other times it's that they just don't know. There's this unfortunate position that a lot of folks have been in where administration, security administration, host administration, network administration, firewall administration, whatever it is, might not be their forte. It might have been a role that they kind of graduated into, and there was never anyone to hand down the reins and say, hey, here's the processes. So they're building these as they go along. The issue with this, though, is adversaries are very good at finding these things out. There's a number of breaches we could refer to that have spoken to a lack of patching, misconfiguration, single factor authentication, remote access tools that are not supposed to be there or have been left wide open, systems and services that should not be facing the internet, but have been, because once again, they've been left wide open. Privileged accounts that should not have access to things, but do because admins just didn't want to deal with hopping through a bastion system or something like that. It's far too common that we run into these types of things. And I think this is another consideration for folks as well, is implement, checks and balances and policies and procedures to kind of lock some of these things down. I did some work over the summer with some folks who were auditing an Active Directory domain. And during this audit, they were surprised at just how many types of security features there were that were disabled by default when it comes to handling and managing privileged groups and administrators and things like that. So maybe one of my final call to actions for everyone is to, find ways within your environment to wrap some protections and controls around these accounts. And, I know, Chris, you're going to talk about some technological ways to do it as well. Mm-hmm. But I think more importantly is to understand that this is a top concern that's out there. And, you want to be able to wrap protections around the folks that don't know, as well as limit the damage of the folks who do know, but just don't care. And again, I'm not calling anyone out in particular, just simply mentioning that sometimes it happens. But Chris, what are your thoughts on this kind of fourth concern here?
Yeah, I want to take a little bit different tact on this.
Please do.
And talk about distributed security. We were seeing a lot of maybe larger enterprises, kind of adopt a SOC that might be virtualized or distributed across the world, and similarly to adding third-party, entries into your organization. That you are not just limited to what you're securing, but you're really having to deal with whatever the security posture of that virtual SOC or that third party partner, and what their security profile and posture might look like. And we've seen this in the last few big breaches. It wasn't that they breached me. No, they breached a partner and then came in, as the case may be. So if you're thinking about misconfigurations for an admin, it's again not because somebody made a mistake, but you're depending upon somebody else's security posture, and you don't know what their risk profile really looks like.
Absolutely. All right, Chris, I'm now going to hand the reins over to you. I think you've got some additional thoughts on some technological implementations and things for us.
Yeah, because looking at the report for security awareness training, I thank you for putting grabbing this particular slide in there. It was important to kind of think about all the things that we're talking about, top risk for humans and attacks, but there's some other things. Cloud jumped out to me as, hey, well, yeah, we're doing a lot more cloud native kind of things, and that's kind of obfuscating the security for some of our users. Mobile devices, the same thing. They think they own the device, but there's maybe corporate information on some of these devices, and to be aware of, or just social media. These are kind of the other things that I think are contributing to what I'm calling the gap between what the humans are able to do in protecting themselves or not protecting themselves, as the case may be, and what we need to fill with technologies to kind of fill in that gap or overcome some of these challenges. So this was an interesting kind of layout of all the things we've talked about so far, as well as some of the other things that are really facing humans as risks. Matt, did you have any more consideration? We talked about cloud or social media.
I know we picked on the top 4 of these. I think the other things that kind of caught my interest as we walk through some of the other top risks here, and again, this is all pulling from the same report. This is the the 2023 security awareness report that came out about a month and a half or two ago. And some of the other ones that stick out to me here, mobile devices is a big one, Chris. I think the concept of mobile devices being used from a corporate enterprise perspective is a very interesting one, because there's a lot of times where, even without knowing it, folks are kind of handing the reins over to another platform or another tool or another thing that they might not be familiar with. And I think that's where it gets, a little tricky. And again, I'm not saying it's good or bad necessarily. It's more about understanding what that risk looks like. And the easiest example I'll give is if you're using an iPhone, for example, and I'm full disclosure, I'm an Apple user myself, so I'm not shaming anybody who is. But if I go through the native mail client and I sync out to everything, I've introduced another step in that process there. I didn't say it was a good step or a bad step. We just need to understand that you've introduced another step there, as opposed to downloading the native app and then using that as a way to connect in. And there's a consideration there, right? Do things change? Is my data exposed to another level? Is it subject to indexing and voice searching and things that it may not have been otherwise? And this is, just again, another consideration for folks to understand when you're utilizing things like mobile devices and syncing across all of them, is, that additional step or those additional API configurations and things that come into play. The other one I think that came up to me, Chris, and jumped out is really interesting. You mentioned it was social media. Social media ends up being this really interesting concept because everyone now has something on everything. And I'm being vague and generic in that definition, which is, the number of times I've run into folks who, if you asked me, did they have a Snapchat account, I would say absolutely not. And then sure enough, they do. And it's very vibrant and active as well. The amount of folks who are taking pictures from their workplaces, with badges on, at company events, detailing what's happening there, and kind of talking about what their work life is like, as if it was public knowledge that should be shared, is always an interesting one to me, Chris. And again, I don't. It's one thing I want everyone to understand here. It's not necessarily a security risk, but you never know how it's going to impact the organization, and I think.
I have a good analogy for
go
you,
for it.
Matt. This is a true story. Happened a few years ago. I'm gonna, eliminate all the names and so on to protect the folks. But I had a nurse friend who was taking pictures on the ward for a birthday party. They were celebrating, a birthday party for one of their colleagues. Unfortunately, behind in the background was the board of patient information, and posted the birthday party pictures to social media, and now the hospital it has patient information out that should not be out, and that nurse friend of mine ended up losing their job for the breach.
Wow.
So it's one of those things we don't think about these things as as humans. What's in the background of the things we're posting.
Yeah, exactly. There's been I think it was, we just had the World Cup last year, and I believe there were lots of pictures on social media where they were posting, like, people were taking pictures from like the control center and things like that with the Wi-Fi passwords clearly written, on the whiteboard. And let me offer everyone a little bit of an understanding of kind of where this matters and where it doesn't, right? I always find it interesting when someone posts a picture that has like a Wi-Fi password or something in the background. The community response to that is always very interesting, because you'll have people who are halfway across the world saying, "Oh, look, now I know the password to that Wi-Fi network." And I'm like, well, you have zero chance,
not even close to it.
of ever encountering that network, right? But for a lot of organizations out there, it's not the risk of who's going to encounter the network. It's the lack of knowledge of the person who took the picture. And I think that's got to be the focus here is, and I know, Chris, I know you've got some technology augmentations to talk about here, and I want to let you get to those as well. But I want folks to understand that when you see those types of things happening, it's not so much the exposure of information, because the risk of someone getting close enough to actually use it, there's no one sitting outside the door who's like, oh, if only I had the password to this Wi-Fi, I could conduct this massive global espionage thing, right? It's more about, hey, everyone, we shouldn't be taking pictures and releasing sensitive information, because if you don't know what sensitive information is, that's a bigger problem for us. That's things that we should talk about. So with that said, Chris, I think you've got some great things to talk about, some augmentation here to add on. So I'm going to let you take it away and walk through.
Yeah,
those.
let's talk about these things. But right beforehand, I just wanted to kind of close out on kind of exploring this human gap. We just talking a lot about kind of the hidden security kind of issues, or that we've obfuscated security from our users. They're not seeing the clues anymore. They're not seeing the indicators of things that are even safe. And you even have folks like Google even considering removing the padlock from the URL line, because people are getting confused by it. Does that mean I'm secure? Does that not secure? Can a bad guy, overwrite my screen and put it there? Well, yes. there's just some concerns about that. The new tech platforms we talked about, whether it's social media, whether it's mobile, cloud, these are all items that are certainly expanding that threat landscape even further. And then on top of that, we've sent people home from the pandemic, and we're slowly maybe moving them back into the office, where the office is where people had that sense that somebody's here to secure me. But at home, we're subject to whatever each household's kind of posture might be. But the two kind of interesting things for me is just our human nature in itself. We have this uncontrollable impulse. We have to click on everything. Even when I know it's bad, I want to make sure it's bad by clicking on it. So just like the tiger picture here, it's really hard for us to change our stripes. And there's a lot of things that might happen in the background, the unknown kind of user behaviors, the things after I clicked, what happens. I don't see the indicators on the screen anymore. When we used to talk about old school viruses, they would put something on the screen saying, hey, you've been stoned, or hey, this is Michelangelo and here's a countdown timer, and so on. They don't do that anymore. The bad things are happening in the background, and that user may not know what's happening in the background. They may not know that their credentials are being tried in every server instance in your whole cloud environment. They don't get the indicators that behavior is occurring. And that's why I think we need to augment these human risks with some technologies. And I want to start with the center of my universe. I hope the center of a lot of SOCs out there is the modern SIEM with AI and ML capabilities. I say modern SIEM because in order to do AI and ML very well, we have to feed it data. And so we have to have a SIEM type of solution that's going to be able to collect the data, be able to handle the scale necessary for AI and ML type of activities. And so some of the legacy ones that are not cloud native certainly fall down in that area. So when you're thinking about different tools that out there, and I'm saying this is the center tool, make sure that you can scale effectively and feed it as much data as possible. In fact, I had an executive meeting just this morning, and they told a great story about their daughter reading the summer book, right? Going back to school. Let me talk to you about the book. I've never read that book before, so let me go out to ChatGPT. Tell me about this book, and it comes back with some authoritative statements that were not about the book. So the child and the parent got in a little bit of an argument there, because they were talking about different things. And it really because the artificial intelligence didn't have the data, didn't have enough data. So this is where I'd like to start. What do you think, Matt?
I do, because I think that I think that that's, not having enough data is one of the biggest hurdles that I think security teams are going to have to get over as we kind of enter into this new model, this new future, if you will. This idea that, oh, I can just plug this thing in and it's going to work and we're done
No.
is not, it's never going to be the case. As much as I hate to say it, it is you and I know, Chris, I think you mentioned earlier, right? You're getting a tool, you're implementing a tool. I like to remind folks too, you're also implementing a template, right? I've used the greeting card analogy. I don't even know if Hallmark stores are still a thing, right? But you used to be able to walk into a Hallmark store and it was hundreds or thousands of templates available that you could, they were starters, but whatever you added and put in is what gave that template value and made it a card, right? Otherwise, you're just buying cards in bulk. And I look at AIML and kind of where we're at with this is to be very similar. A lot of security tooling is in the very similar boat for me, where you're implementing a template. What you fill that template with is going to speak to the strength of it. And I think you've called that out here, which is they need to be provided with the right types of information, the right types of data in order to come back and be effective. But otherwise, you're just looking at a really fancy, set of logs.
It's kind of sort of the next technology underneath SIM. I think of user analytics not as its own product, but really an offshoot of what you should be doing with your SIM. It's about baselining normal behavior for your users and detecting the abnormal behavior. So we're moving beyond just correlation of logs and looking at things like MITRE TTPs. And so, yep, we know about those things. We know how those techniques work. We can write rules for those. No, we need to be able to find the other things that are abnormal, that maybe are using correct credentials, maybe are using the correct way of accessing, but doing so in an inappropriate or untimely way. And the easiest thing we talk about in terms of kind of malicious insiders is, yes, they have good credentials. Yes, they're allowed to go to salesforce.com. Yes, they are allowed to look at your customer list, but they've never done so on Saturday. Right? Or they never did that and also, shove that information up to a Google Drive. You start putting together some of those unusual behaviors, and it allows you to detect really the undetectable, detect those things that that you would not normally see. Or again, from the other risks that we've talked about already this morning, is when they click on that email and the bad things are happening in the background, it's going to show up as bad things happening in the background that are not normal for that user. So this is why this level of technology is, I think, an essential component to how we're going to have to deal with, the risk of humans moving forward.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Chris. I think knowing what your users look like, what they're supposed to look like, what they actually look like is going to go a huge way in kind of defending through these. I know the next one up is one of your favorite things to talk about as well.
Chat GPT, right? Again, a tool. And if we think about some different things, we can start leveraging this tool for the good side. We can start asking it things like, analyze my firewall logs and identify any unauthorized or suspicious connections. Right? I could go through the firewall log and go one by line, it'll take me forever. Again, we're trying to add speed. We're trying to add some capability where the mundane tasks can be done automatically for us. Or ask ChatGPT, monitor system processes and flag any abnormal behavior that might be potential malware. Okay. Or my favorite, the example I gave earlier, ChatGPT, can you build me an executable that creates a registry entry in Windows that will eventually give me elevated privileges to XYZ database. Okay, let's see what it comes up with, and then again you're looking for those indicators of those attacks and so on. If we think about ChatGPT, this thing it's exploded. As of February 2023, I think there was like 100 million users utilizing ChatGPT. They have ChatGPT's website has over 9 billion views all time. So people are using this as a tool. And don't even get me started on my 16-year-old and doing homework yet, because we've been talking about you're not going to let ChatGPT write all your reports, as the case may be. But we have to start thinking about how do we use this tool? How do we take advantage? Can I ask GPT to help me with detection? Help me find things that I would not normally look for on a daily basis. And then how do we automate or add some automation to this so that the mundane task can be done faster?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only thing I'll add on here, Chris, as well, is that, one of the things that I think security teams should think about where ChatGPT can be very useful is in that aspect of what are and this is going to sound like a weird angle, but it's definitely where these things come into play. What are the questions that you keep getting asked by your users that you wish you weren't getting asked? And this is not an annoyance factor. And I'm very, very quick to call out security professionals who find users annoying in this case, because if it's the same user every single day at 10 a.m. is asking, where do I send my spear phishing emails? Okay, I get it. They might need some extra education, right? But similar to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, if your users, or you want to empower your users, utilize ChatGPT and other types of functionality to help put that education forward. One of the favorite kind of crossovers I've ever seen is between Clippy and ChatGPT. And it's where you have this idea of like, hey, it seems like you have a spear phishing email, and let ChatGPT be the one that says, here's what to do next. Here's how to report it.
Here's how we make it easy.
Here's how we make it easy, right? The Staples easy button comes in as well. And this is where we kind of tie things together. And if I'm a security professional and I say, I want to make sure my users report every single thing that they think is a spearfish that comes through, how do I make it easier for them to do so? You can't just make the button available. You also need to educate users on the types of questions that they're going to ask. And this is where I think about, the number of times I'm on a website and I've got a question about a product or a return or something like that. I know I'm interacting with a bot, for lack of a better term. It's not always necessarily a human there, but I'm able to ask my question in different ways and still get myself to the right answer. And I'm not trying to trick the bot or ask anything that it can't answer. I'm not trying to find a weakness or a vulnerability or anything. But if I ask, hey, my product is broken, I want to get a refund, blah, 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 the bot knows, they're asking about returns. Got it. Let me push them down that path. Versus if I say, I want to return my product. My point being, these technologies can help pick through those keywords and figure out what the users are actually asking and direct them to the right place and help them understand where they can be. And I think from a security perspective, what more could you ask for than an automated system that helps answer 80% of your questions? Right? It's almost like a dream come true where you can say, wait a second, this bot can do it for me and that kind of stuff. And again, I think that's an area where we will find some success. And if from a security perspective, if we utilize these in the right manner.
Mm-hmm. The last technology, Matt, that I wanted to talk about. Did we miss one? Oh, okay, couple more here.
Couple more.
Right. SOAR, orchestration, automation, remediation. Right. This is a technology where we've been dancing around this whole thing for the last three kind of paragraphs here, which is how do we automate the mundane so that we can focus the human resources on the real security risks. And just the example of using ChatGPT and a bot to answer, basic security questions, or help, identify potential risk to the humans they're not seeing in their email. I think are perfect examples of this. And I'm seeing more automation types of capabilities being put into the modern SIM. So that's where I think a lot of this stuff is we're trying to consolidate a lot of these technologies together to make it easier for folks, especially in the SOC, in order to kind of get to where they need to be.
Absolutely. No, I've got nothing but agreement now, Chris, and I want to make sure we get to our last technology as well. But I'll just say that you mentioned, before we move on to the shared threat intelligence, I think the other important part of the story here is also going to be what you mentioned out is just how much automation we're seeing from that side as well. It's a great thing. I know here at SANS, we've been talking about automation and integration for years. We used to do surveys on things that are being automated and integrated, and I'm glad to see that it is still still has a lot of traction in the way that security teams build things out. But I'll continue to go as far as to say, hey, if there are processes that humans are performing mundane, repetitive tasks, it's exactly what computers were designed for. Let them do the mundane and repetitive tasks. All right, Chris, and last but not least,
I think one of my other favorites is shared, threat intelligence. And this line that I put on here, hey, I've seen the dark web. Where is the light web? We've made it difficult for us as maybe vendors, security practitioners, to think about how do we share data across the board. It's more than just threat, data. It's more than just MITRE TTPs, and I'm glad we have some frameworks that we're all sort of agreeing to. But it's all the way down to a future where somebody's normal habits on a retail site might inform what be a normal habit inside your organization, and that where you can find the abnormal. Looking for those more hidden risks. And I know I've just jumped into a Minority Report-ish precog kind of future here, but again, it's about understanding all of the data that's available. We started from the very beginning with, hey, you need to get more data in your SIM. Well, we need to get more data from more different places, more different sources, and sharing threat intelligence across the board. So I'm going to keep being an advocate for doing that, even as we're trying to monetize. Even as we're trying to get some profit margin out of the different threats that we have. Here at Sumo, we've kind of put a lot of these things together to where I understand what rules our users have within the Sumo community. I know what TTPs are being exercised within the Sumo community. And now I can push that intelligence back to the rest of the Sumo community to say things like, we can improve your detection rates. We can improve your false positives. We can show you where other users are using different log sources to detect things that you're not. And being able to share that intelligence to make everybody's posture that much better. So there's my 2 cents.
I like it. It is definitely a very important stance to understand that a lot of times the things that you're experiencing as an organization, you're not alone in experiencing as well. And this is a huge takeaway for folks out there, and perhaps maybe our last little call to action, because we are almost right at the top of the hour, Chris. But one of the final little calls to action for folks on that last topic there of shared threat intelligence is, very similar to that story I gave a little bit earlier about that executive team that kind of, once they opened up about their spear phishing troubles, realized that they were all together in this. it goes a long way to talk to your peers and to talk to other folks in the industry and understand that adversaries don't often target one and only one target at a time. They will pick multiples. They go after industries or sectors or processes or workflows, and they look for areas where they can make the largest impact with the least amount of work, just like pretty much anybody else does. And, use that to your advantage and say that shared threat intelligence is another area where I can augment and make it less difficult for my humans to have to do their thing. So awesome. Chris, with that said, I think we are just about at the top of the hour. I want to hand it back to Mary Lynn in just a second here. But before I do, I want to send a huge thanks for having you with me today. This was a great discussion we had. I think we were able to talk about like the human side of a lot of this stuff and really focus on some of those key technologies that can help augment some of the issues that we see with them. So thank you for joining me. And Mary Lynn, I'll hand it over to you to close us out for today.
Thank you so much, Matt and Chris, for your great presentation, and to Sumo Logic for sponsoring this webcast, which helps to bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Thanks, everyone.